So good evening, everyone. Welcome to this live Q&A with Senator Jason Lewis. I'm Tom Dalton, Senator Lewis's communications director, and I'll be moderating this conversation. I'll jump right in and introduce Senator Lewis, and just want to preface by saying that we're trying out a new software for our live stream tonight that lets us conduct this Facebook Live town hall while remaining physically distant from each other. So in a time of pandemic, it's a really great tool, and we're excited to try it out. So without further ado, here's Senator Jason Lewis. Hi, Senator. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. And I want to just start out by thanking Tom for figuring out StreamYard for us. As Tom said, it's a new tool that we're using tonight that we hope will, in addition to maintaining safe distancing, also we hope will help by providing good audio for everybody, so you can hear everything that we're hoping to discuss with you tonight. So I want to start by wishing everyone well, and hope that you are safe and healthy, and all of your loved ones as well. And of course, I want to extend our deep gratitude to our healthcare professionals, to our first responders, to our public health officials in our communities, and grocery store workers and truck drivers, and everybody who is helping us to navigate through this continued crisis. As I've discussed previously in some earlier conversations we've had, our state government has been pursuing a two-pronged strategy to deal with the crisis. The first is that we are and continue to take a lot of measures to contain the spread of the virus in order to minimize hospitalizations and to save lives. And that's really what's most important here. And the good news is that all of the physical distancing that we're all doing, and the sacrifices that so many are making, is really having an impact. And we are starting to see early signs that the spread of the virus and the number of people who are getting hospitalized, is starting to plateau and even decline a little bit. And we expect that to continue as long as we continue to stay the course with all of the measures we're taking from a public health standpoint. The second part of the strategy that we have been and will continue to pursue, both the state and the federal government, is to do whatever we can to mitigate the devastating social and economic impacts of this pandemic on our communities. So we've talked a little bit in the past about some of the different actions that we have been taking, but I thought I would just very quickly, summarize what we've been doing to respond to both the public health and economic crisis. And this is through actions of our state government working in collaboration with our federal government, and also, of course, with our local community municipalities as well. So first of all, as I hope you know by now, unemployment benefits have been significantly expanded and strengthened, actually to an unprecedented degree. And everyone who qualifies, which includes those who are independent contractors, self-employed, gig economy workers who would not ordinarily qualify for benefits, you receive the normal benefit, which is about half of what you were earning before, plus an additional $600 per week as a result of the Federal CARES Act, and the length of time that somebody can continue to receive benefits if they haven't been reemployed or called back from furlough or had their income restored, is up to 39 weeks. So that's significantly longer than is typically the case. We know it's been frustrating for many people to kind of get their benefits approved. Our State Department of Unemployment Insurance, has been processing tens of thousands of applications, and we hear that is getting better. But again, anyone who's having challenges with your own unemployment claim, or if you have a friend or a relative or anyone you know who's facing any challenges, please have them contact my office. We've been helping lots of our constituents to get these issues resolved so they can get their unemployment benefits, as soon as possible. Second major action that we've been taking is to help our small businesses and our nonprofits who are really being enormously impacted, by this crisis. And the federal government just approved another round of loans, which can be forgivable in certain cases for small businesses and nonprofits. And a lot of that was also set aside for our smallest businesses and smallest community banks. So we're very hopeful that this will be equitably allocated, and that more of our community downtown mom and pop businesses and others will be able to get at least some assistance through the Paycheck Protection Program and other SBA loan programs. We've also, third, been significantly increasing emergency funding for public health across the state, for our hospitals and community health centers, for our nursing homes and other long-term care facilities, which have been impacted, devastating impact from this virus on our populations in our nursing homes. And certainly more needs to be done to help that sector. We've also passed legislation to help our cities and towns with more budgeting flexibility, permitting relief, assistance with spring elections and town meetings and those sorts of things. We extended the tax filing deadline for both federal and state taxes from April 15th to July 15th. Very pleased that we were able to reach final agreement on legislation that the governor signed recently to stop any evictions or foreclosures to protect renters and homeowners during this crisis. And by the way, that also applies to small businesses as well. If they have difficulty paying their rent as a result of the crisis, they also are protected. We put in place liability protections for healthcare workers. We canceled MCAS testing for the remainder of the school year and gave the Department of Education more flexibility to also waive the graduation requirement so that we could again take into consideration the impacts on our students and our schools from this from the pandemic. And we also authorized electronic notarization for real estate and other business transactions, which is important to certain sectors of our economy. So that's some of the actions that we have taken at the state and federal level, and appreciate all the input that many of you have provided, to me and my colleagues in working on these many pieces of legislation and trying to move them as quickly as we can through the legislative process, which is not ordinarily known for moving quickly. We know there's a lot more we need to do as we continue to deal with this pandemic and the many consequences and impacts it's having on our communities. We're working currently on legislation to improve data collection and reporting so we can better understand the disparate impacts that the pandemic is having on different populations. We also are working to strengthen the social safety net for our low-income families and our most vulnerable members of our communities. We are also working on legislation for the upcoming fall elections. The state primary will be on September 1st this year. And then, of course, the presidential general election in November. So we want to make sure that there are more options for folks to vote by mail and or more early voting options, similar to what we did, the legislature did for the spring municipal election. So we're working on that as well. We know how important that is to make sure nobody feels that they can't exercise their right to vote because of concerns about their health and safety. I'm also very pleased and excited about legislation that I recently filed working with the Raise Up Massachusetts Coalition and also with Representative Paul Donato in the House. And that is for emergency paid sick time. And that's a critical worker need in a time like this, so that anyone who is contagious or needs to quarantine or care for a family member, can have job protected paid sick time to do so. I do want to voice, as I know many of you have shared with me, concerns about the reopening advisory task force that Governor Baker recently convened. I'm certainly pleased he's put this task force together and that they are doing a lot of hard work to think through how we could gradually start to reopen non-essential businesses and other parts of our economy. But I really believe that we need to have more diverse voices, at the table as this plan is being developed and implemented. People like frontline workers who are, most impacted from a health and safety perspective by the virus. Labor leaders were not included in this task force. Childcare providers, critical sector to enable working families to go back to work. Arts and tourism sector also. So many others. And I, been calling on the governor to make sure that these voices are at the table and that we are carefully thinking through all of the different sectors of our economy and our society and how we can safely allow people to, resume what used to be part of our lives before this pandemic struck. So a lot more work to be done there. And I can assure you that I and my colleagues in the Senate will be paying very close attention to the work of this advisory task force and what their recommendations will be which we will start to see in the next few weeks. And I'm sure we'll talk more about this during the town hall tonight. So let me just wrap up by mentioning, and we can remind you at the end as well, and maybe Tom can also put these up on the screen, but we've got 2 upcoming events I wanted to make sure you're also aware of. On Thursday this week, which is May 7th, I'm very excited. We're going to be having a virtual nonprofit forum. So a virtual panel. We've got 4 great speakers that are going to be looking specifically at the unique challenges, very significant challenges facing our nonprofit sector from the pandemic. So we're talking about our human service providers, our arts and cultural organizations, and many other very important community nonprofits. What are the challenges and what are the solutions? So that will be on Thursday, May 7th at 2:30 p.m. We hope you can join us. And then next week, the Education Committee, of which I serve as the Senate Chair, will be holding an oversight hearing to help us better understand how remote learning is going in our schools all across Massachusetts in different kinds of districts, for different age students, for students with special needs and English learners. And we'll have some, again, taking testimony from everybody from the Secretary of Education to the Commissioner to teachers, parents, hopefully some students, from a range of different schools and districts. So that's next Wednesday, May 13th, starting at 11 a.m. And everybody will be welcome to tune into the live stream on the legislature's website. So let's now, open it up for your feedback for me. And again, thank you very much for joining us for this town hall this evening. Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Senator. So we've already got a couple questions, and like I mentioned at the beginning, we're using a new platform, so we might have some fancy new gadgets that we can try out. So I'm going to try the first thing, and I'm going to see if we can present the question that I'm going to ask you to respond to on screen so that everyone can see. Look at that. So here's a question from Robin Teller Decker, asking, in an effort to get inspection sticker renewals going again, is it possible to go back to the way it used to be when vehicle owners stayed in their cars rather than the inspectors entering our cars?
Thank you, Robin. My understanding, and I think this question actually came up during our last town hall, is that it is, if your inspection sticker expires now during the pandemic, there is relief. So you don't have to get a new inspection sticker right away. So that gives people some some time till the emergency order is lifted to get your vehicle re-inspected. And we can make sure to confirm that as well. But I think what you're suggesting is also another way of doing inspections, and that sounds sensible to me. So we will certainly take that back, and that can be the kind of feedback I think that we can share with the Governor Baker's reopening task force. And they are also, I should have mentioned this earlier, they are taking written feedback from anybody who wants to submit it. And I don't know if Tom's able to, find the link where you can go to provide that feedback. If we're able to do that, we'll put it up or put it in the Facebook comments. But otherwise, we'll certainly share this feedback, with the governor's advisory task force. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. So our next question is from Paul Weston, and it's with regard to the new law that you mentioned, halting evictions and foreclosures. And obviously, his question strikes at the idea of what are landlords supposed to do about their unpaid rent?
Yes, thank you for asking that, Paul. And I should have clarified that when I mentioned the moratorium that we placed on eviction. So that the moratorium is not forgiveness for rent that is owed or mortgage payments that are owed. So a tenant is still obligated to pay the rent that they owe, and so it just means that somebody can't be evicted for unpaid rent due to the coronavirus crisis. So if their inability to pay rent is because they've lost their job or lost their source of income because of this emergency, then they can't be evicted. However, they still will be required to pay their rent. Certainly if they are able to collect unemployment benefits or other assistance, then the expectation is that would allow them to continue to pay their rent. The other thing we did do in the legislation is allow landlords to use the last month's rent that they already have collected for, if they need to do any maintenance or repairs or something like that on the property in the meantime.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to point out, did include the link to submitting comments to the reopening advisory board in the comments, so folks can find that there. We have a comment here. Yeah, we have a comment here from Kathy Raboul about the reopening task force. She says, please include lower income and racial diversity in the reopening task force. So I don't know if you wanted to speak to that at all, Senator.
Yeah, just want to thank you, Kathy. Exactly, couldn't agree with you more. The governor, let's be fair, he's been doing a lot of things right, I think, in managing through this crisis, and a lot better, stronger leadership than many other states. But I think he really missed the mark when it comes to this reopening advisory task force in not having more diverse representation, definitely including more vulnerable populations that are particularly at risk from the virus, frontline workers, low-income folks, senior citizens, for example. AARP probably should be part of this task force. So, unfortunately, they're working with such a short deadline. They're going to be issuing their recommendations, I think, for May 18th. So, what I think we need to do, if the governor's not going to expand the task force at this point, is to make sure that all of these voices and perspectives are being heard, and continue to push the task force, which I've been doing, and others as well, to make sure that they are hearing from and getting input and perspective from a much wider group of people across the state.
So one question that's been discussed a lot, and I think this might be an issue that's more a matter of federal policy, but I don't know if you wanted to weigh in. Polanyi pointed out the idea that essential workers should get hazard pay, for going to work and risking exposure to the virus. Do you have any ideas about that particular proposal, but also more broadly how we can support the essential workers who are being asked to do really difficult work right now?
Yes, another really important point. We've definitely seen, in a variety of different sectors, whether that's in human services, nursing homes, grocery stores, pharmacies, um, public transportation, so many different workers, or healthcare workers, of course. And so it's definitely something that I think we're hopeful that the next federal stimulus bill might include funding to provide additional pay, whether that's hazard pay or bonuses, for a wide range of different essential workers. Fortunately, some employers, have stepped up and have given additional pay or bonuses or other benefits to their essential workers. So I applaud them for doing that. I wish more, particularly large companies, were doing that, and I call on them to do that. At the state level, we certainly have a number of bills that have been filed by legislators that would also require hazard pay, or time and a half for different categories of workers, and we are looking at that and considering that. The big challenge we have at the state level, and I didn't really talk about this in my opening remarks, but I can talk more about it if it's interest, is the fiscal outlook for our state and the budget outlook, which unfortunately is very grim. The fact that the pandemic has created, what we think may even be an unemployment rate now above 20% in Massachusetts, and the biggest drop in the state's gross domestic product, probably that we will have seen since probably all the way back to the Great Depression, is also having a devastating impact on the revenues that the state collects, which includes income taxes and sales taxes and capital gains. And, so it is putting a very significant constraint on, and unfortunately will for the foreseeable future, on the state's ability to provide funding for so many critical needs we have. So we're still going to try to do the best we can, but it really is critical that the federal government really steps up, because unlike the states and our cities and towns, they don't have to run a balanced budget. They can run a deficit and they can borrow money, which gives them much greater capacity to provide relief and stimulus, as we work our way through this crisis.
Thanks, Senator. So we received a question by message, actually, that was asking about the capacity of the state's unemployment system. And it pointed out that when it comes to the technology behind the Massachusetts Department of Unemployment Assistance, it's not exactly a Fortune 500 website. It's not a system that seems terribly modern. And so the constituent who sent us a message, just asked about how the system is managing the volume. Is the state bringing in outside help to work on unemployment claims? I know that when it comes to the pandemic unemployment assistance, which is kind of a separate category of unemployment assistance, there's been some work going on. So could you speak to some of the things that are happening that we've heard about in the Department of Unemployment Assistance?
Yep, absolutely. So currently, I serve as the Senate Chair of the Education Committee, but last legislative session, I actually served as the Chair of the Labor and Workforce Committee. So I actually ended up taking a tour as the chair of the Department of Unemployment Assistance and meeting with their director and a lot of their staff, and got a chance to take a closer look at the online platform that they use. And there's no question, it's pretty outdated and clunky, and they know it. And they do have plans to do a major upgrade, but of course they're not going to be able to do it right now in the midst of this crisis. But the good news is although it's not that user friendly, it has been very stable and resilient, and they have been able to process. Traditionally, our state will process maybe 5, 7, maybe 10,000 claims, a week for unemployment benefits. And since this crisis began in mid-March, we've been processing upwards of 100,000 claims per week. I think we peaked at almost 200,000 one of the weeks, and the system has been able to handle that. It hasn't crashed. Doesn't mean that a lot of people haven't had challenges getting their claims through and approved. And that's where the DUA and my office and other legislators have had to work to help get those resolved. But they have been able to get those claims ultimately processed. And when someone is approved for benefits, it is retroactive to when you lost your job or were furloughed or had your hours reduced. As Tom mentioned, there is also a new program that was authorized by the CARES Act called Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, which is for those folks who would not ordinarily be eligible for unemployment insurance. So that includes independent contractors, people who are self-employed, people who work in the gig economy and might be driving for Uber or Lyft. And previously, they've never qualified for unemployment benefits. So that was a really big deal that they were included in the CARES Act. And the state, just like every other state, had to basically stand up a new platform to process those claims. And so it was pretty daunting undertaking. And they first estimated they wouldn't be able to have it up and running until May 1st. And I think many of us, and I'll admit, myself included, thought that was probably unlikely that they would actually have that running by May 1st. But amazingly, they actually got it up and running 10 days early. And that's really, they deserve a lot of credit. The Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development, led by Secretary Rosalind Acosta and her team, they did a phenomenal job of getting that software platform built, tested, and implemented 10 days early. And what I hear is that those who've been applying for benefits under that program, it's been going relatively smoothly. Again, they're getting approved and starting to receive their unemployment checks. So that has actually gone really well. Just to give you a sense of what it's taken, they before the pandemic, the Department of Unemployment Assistance had about 50 staff that were frontline staff processing claims, and they've ramped up in the last 6 weeks to over 800 people. So that's an incredible undertaking that they've gone through to bring people on board and train them and get them work right away, processing claims and getting those approved. So I really think that's, even though there have been frustrations, and we've certainly worked with constituents who, really were running into problems getting their benefits approved. Overall, I think, they have done a great job, with responding to this crisis.
Great. So we've got a question here from Matt Johnson, and I think it really strikes at one of the core policy questions that policymakers like you and Governor Baker and so many others are facing all around the country right now. It's kind of a long one, so I won't leave it up on the screen the whole time. But he asks, why hasn't there been a quicker response to reopening businesses? And then he lists off a couple ideas about, how government could support businesses in reopening. But could you speak a little bit up to the kind of core questions that come up when we talk about the idea of getting back towards reopening businesses and the prerequisites that need to be in place to also protect public health as we do that?
Right. So yeah, thanks for asking that. And there's Matt, there's a lot of discussions going on right now within the state government and certainly within the public about how do we move forward, right? And we put in place our state and many others, strict measures to keep people apart. and to control the spread of this virus, right? And as I said earlier, that definitely has had a very significant impact on reducing the spread and on the number of people who've had to be hospitalized in our state. The good news is our hospitals, which did a great job preparing, have not been overwhelmed, by patients, and the ICU number of beds has been sufficient so far to handle those who've needed that level of care, and that has undoubtedly saved lives. And that is, again, I think we would hopefully all agree is the most important thing. So that has been, I think, successful in containing the spread. Although, notwithstanding that, we've still had tragically, many thousands of deaths, in our state and many more thousands around the country. The challenge now is if we don't move forward very carefully and put, public health guidance and epidemiological experts front and center, then we will just see the virus, come back, and the spread will dramatically or rapidly increase, and all of this work we've done will be for naught, and that won't protect our economy because we'll just be having to shut down again. So the key now is to move forward in a very careful, thoughtful, way. That is what the governor's, reopening task force is charged with, figuring out. And the kinds of questions, that points you made in your question are exactly the kinds of issues that I know that they're working on. And I expect as part of their report and recommendations, that's exactly what they will be discussing, how in different sectors of the economy, depending on both the essential nature of that business to our communities and our economy, and also the risk involved for workers and customers, they're going to make those kinds of decisions. But what the governor has said, and I agree with him completely on this, is that we have to have seen a sustained, in the key data around the number of cases of this virus and the number of hospitalizations. We have to have seen a sustained downward trend. Can't just be in a couple days, but over a couple week period. The governor has said over 2 weeks, to see that sustained trend, to know that, okay, if we can now start taking some measures to, reopen certain parts of the economy, obviously it won't be back to the way it was exactly before. We're going to have to continue to take a number of measures to keep people safe. But then we will, be in a position to do that. But we have to be very careful that we don't rush back into it, because and we've seen this happen already in some other countries. And I'm sorry to say, but I think we're going to see this in some other states that have not done this in as careful or thoughtful a way as they should. You're going to see the virus come roaring back, and and then we'd have to shut down potentially again sectors of the economy, and that would be extremely devastating to have to do that again.
Thank you, Senator. So while we're waiting for some other questions to come in from the public, and we certainly do encourage people to ask any questions you've got in the comments, we'll be happy to answer. But Senator, I wondered if you could speak a little more about the bill that you referred to in your introduction that you filed with Representative Donato with the help of Raise Up Massachusetts related to emergency paid sick time. Could you talk a little bit about the background on that bill and what made you file that?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. Happy to do that. So the idea of having job protected paid sick time for workers is long been something I've prioritized and believed is really important. And so back in 2014, there was an effort spearheaded by the Raise Up coalition to put the idea of earned paid sick time before the voters of Massachusetts. And we had been working to try to pass legislation prior to that, but unfortunately had not yet been successful. So that ballot question, I was very pleased, was overwhelmingly supported, by voters in Massachusetts, and that did lead to many workers, not all, but many in the state, who do have access to earned paid job protected sick time. That, however, envisioned, obviously a global pandemic and the need to, self quarantine for as long as 2 weeks, and just the level of health risk and the need to take time off of work that so many people are experiencing, either for themselves or for a loved one. Fortunately, the federal government, in the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which was the law they passed before the CARES Act, they had the foresight to recognize how important emergency paid sick time is. And they did include in that bill a program that does fortunately provide additional sick time benefits to many workers across the country, including in Massachusetts. But unfortunately, that law leaves out, some groups of workers. For example, workers in larger companies with more than 500 employees are actually not covered by the new federal program. And there's some other cases as well where companies, can choose to opt out. So we, believe that, this option for job protected paid sick time for at least 2 weeks should be available for everybody. It shouldn't matter if you work for a large company or a small company, or if you're in one sector or another, because of course we want to make sure we limit the spread of this virus, and we know how contagious it is. So the worst thing is to have somebody who is sick, feeling like they have to go to work because otherwise they could lose their job or they can't afford to go without a paycheck. So that's why we filed the legislation. It would provide up to 2 weeks of job protected emergency paid sick time in certain cases, and it would plug the holes, the gaps that are left from the federal paid sick time program. And we do propose in the bill currently that the costs to businesses of providing this would actually get reimbursed by the state. We do know that would be a challenge, though, because of what I discussed previously in terms of the fiscal outlook for the state. So probably more conversation will still have to be had about that as that legislation continues to be considered in the state legislature.
Great, thank you, Senator. So we're still happy to take any questions that those of you watching might have for the senator. This is your chance to have your legislator captive in front of you and ready to respond to your concerns. So we're very happy to be here and be here with all of you this evening. But Senator, I don't know if you wanted to improvise a little bit in the meantime while we wait for more questions.
Sure. I don't think you ever met a politician who didn't have more to say, right, Tom? Let me just a few other thoughts that come to mind. This pandemic is having, obviously across the board, a devastating impact on so many of our neighbors and our communities, but it is impacting some sectors, even more than others. And I did want to, mention restaurants. I think is a part of our economy that is really, really, as you all know, been hit hard. And the ability to, do takeout and delivery, and we did include alcohol in that, and also groceries more recently. That helps, but it's really not a substitute. And what's also pretty devastating for our restaurants is, many of them have business interruption insurance policies, but insurers are saying that they're not going to pay claims because they explicitly, don't allow a pandemic or a virus to be a claimable loss. So that's like a double blow, to many of our, particularly our smaller restaurants. So I just want folks to know we understand that is huge, and how important restaurants are to vibrant downtowns in our communities and all the number of people that they employ. And it's just such an important part of our general social life and quality of life. So we're going to have to figure out, how other ways we're going to be able to help, particularly the hospitality sector. the event sector also, all kinds of events. For example, I was on the phone recently with a constituent of mine who does flower arrangements for weddings and corporate events, and that's just completely decimated because there's just no large events happening, and probably won't be for for quite some time. So again, there's just sectors like that in our economy that we really are going to have to figure out, how do we support them and sustain them, through what unfortunately is probably not going to be weeks long, but many months long. Childcare and daycare providers is another part that I'm very concerned about. And we know they're really struggling as well. And even in the best of times, our childcare providers and early education, whether it's family or center-based, operate on very, very thin margins. And so they've been really very significantly impacted by the crisis as well. And that's critical, to the well-being of our young children and families. It's also very critical to the functioning of our economy, because if working families don't have, access to affordable, quality childcare options, how do they go back to work? So, a lot of this is interconnected, of course, and there's a lot that we're going to have to figure out that can't be solved just by local government or state government or the federal government. It's going to take also our our business community. It's going to take our philanthropic community. It's going to take all of us, sort of working together, and I think sometimes in new and innovative ways that we maybe haven't used before, and that could also present some good perhaps some good. I always like to look on the find the silver lining and look on the bright side if you can, but this might help to spur the kinds of social and economic changes that I think we've long needed to make our society more just, more equitable for everyone, and that includes more folks who have been marginalized, and both individuals, and also I think in many cases small businesses that have really were struggling already before this pandemic hit. Back to you, Tom.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think those are great points. And I know when it comes to the local restaurants, my household and I have been availing of, local takeout as much as our budgets can manage, trying to keep our favorite restaurants thriving and doing well. And it's nice not to cook all your own meals. So, I'd encourage everyone to take a look at which of their favorite local restaurants are offering takeout and that kind of thing. We've got another question here, actually from Kathy again. She's referring to the kind of troubling news about some of the things that happened over the weekend in the Bristol County House of Corrections, and specifically your colleague Senator Chang Diaz going over to the jail this weekend to try to do a legislative inspection. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on this issue that you could speak to.
Yes, thanks for mentioning that, Kathy. That was I only know what I've read about what happened this weekend, but it seems very troubling. And we had a Senate caucus earlier today. Obviously, we do it virtually now using Zoom. But this was one of the agenda items during the Senate Democratic caucus earlier today. And we specifically talked about Senator Chang Diaz having tried to visit the facility. And I'm really impressed with your knowledge of Mass General Law, because as you rightly point out, lawmakers are by statute entitled to visit correctional facilities. And so she was illegally denied access to the Bristol County House of Corrections. So what the state Senate is doing is we've launched an investigation, and it's going to be led by the Senate Post-Audit and Oversight Committee, which is chaired by Senator John Keenan from Quincy. And he is already, his committee's already up and running, and they will be embarking on a full investigation, of not only this incident and what happened and the responsibility of the sheriff, and what he and his team did, what the inmates may have done. Also around Senator Cheng Diaz and what happened with her and not being allowed in. And I think they're also going to be looking at some of the preceding actions that that have been taken by this sheriff even before this incident this weekend. So I know they're going to do this with urgency. They'll have to obviously do their work virtually, but we will certainly be looking for their report as soon as possible.
Great. Thank you, Senator. So I'm not seeing any more questions come in. So we can maybe put out a last call for questions now if anybody watching has anything they'd like to ask Senator Lewis about. And then, Senator, if you want to talk us out for a minute or two, we can see if we catch any last minute questions before we finish up.
Great. And Tom, maybe we can also, as we wrap up, we can post, I want to thank Tom and all my staff in my office who've just been doing a great job and working super hard to support our district and our constituents. And one of the things we've done is created some what I hope are helpful guides to resources that are out there. So we created one guide for residents. We created a second guide for small businesses and nonprofits. And then we also did a third one specifically around unemployment benefits. And we actually translated that into a variety of different languages as well. So I don't know if Tom, if you were able to put up the links to those, or we can share those as well in the comments. But
yeah, I'm happy to share those links.
Great, thank you. We want to make sure that everybody knows that these guides are out there. They have lots of links in them. They point you to lots of different resources that we want to make sure that folks are availing themselves of. So just want to thank you all for tuning into the town hall. Thanks for a lot of good discussion and great questions. And thank you so much to all of you for everything that everyone's doing, for not just to, abide by the public health, guidelines and the sacrifices that we're, all making to keep each other safe and healthy, but the extraordinary acts of kindness and generosity, that we are seeing from so many in our community. I'm hearing from some of our nonprofits like Bread of Life in Malden that they've just seen an outpouring, of donations and, volunteers stepping forward to help make deliveries to folks who are seniors who are homebound or people with disabilities. So many people are really going out of their way to help their neighbors and help others. And we really, really appreciate that. This is a very, very, very difficult time that we're living through. And, it's going to take a lot of patience and resilience and a lot of support for each other in the weeks and months to come. But I'm certainly heartened by the response we've seen from so many members of our community. So thank you, and stay safe and healthy, and best wishes to everyone.
Great, thanks, Senator. And in the interest of keeping the Q&A going for as long as possible, why don't we end with this one more question from Matt Johnson. He says, along with the statistics, and as May 18th approaches, will we see parks or golf courses open shortly after? So just kind of speaking a little more to those questions about which kinds of businesses and public amenities can open, what's it going to look like when they do? Yeah,
so definitely all of these questions are on the table for sure, and are being very actively considered by the governor's reopening advisory task force. I know they are specifically looking at recreational opportunities, whether that's some of our state parks, beaches, golfing, other recreational activities, and definitely looking at what could we do to enable folks to enjoy those activities, particularly with the warmer weather now coming, but to do so in a safe way. So unfortunately, I don't think we're probably going to see too many changes to the current policy before May 18th. But I do think shortly after May 18th, again, assuming that we're continuing to see, a decline in the spread of the virus and in the number of people who are hospitalized, if we do continue to see that trend continue, then I do think we will see some loosening up of some recreational facilities, the operations of certain kinds of businesses, but it'll be gradual. It will be phased. And again, it's not going to be going back to obviously the way it was before the pandemic. I think we're still going to have to take measures to protect ourselves and others, probably through social distancing measures, through personal hygiene, through masks, through other steps like that. But certainly I, like everybody else, look forward to being able to get back to some of the things we love to do. For me personally, I like to swim laps for exercise. And of course, the pool at the Y that I go to has been closed. And I love to swim outdoors in the summer when I can. So I'm certainly looking forward to being able to do that. But again, recognize it has to be safe, not just for me, but for people around me as well. So thanks again, everyone.
Great. Thanks so much, Senator. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Bye-bye.